Royal deformities. The hideous Habsburg jaw. Throughout history, there has been a remarkable tendency for rulers to marry close relatives in order to secure bloodlines and keep them pure. This practice of familial inbreeding we now know leads to a dramatic increase in damaging genetic disorders among offspring. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt practiced this ritual for over 3,000 years, commonly marrying their sisters or brothers, or even the children of the former or latter. Such arrangements were no doubt attributed to the influence of the Egyptian pantheon of gods, where the revered god Osiris was married to his sister, the goddess Isis, thus removing the taboo nature of incestuous relations among Egyptian rulers. Though, oddly enough, history shows that this seems to have caused very few standout deformities or health issues among the majority of their descendants. Scientists have theorized that the only way this could be possible was that although the pharaohs publicly made a big deal of marrying close family members, that they in fact produced heirs by taking mistresses in private. This would explain the relative lack of genetic disorders in their children and would fit in with the widely suspected consort culture of ancient Egyptian rulers. In comparison, those pharaohs who failed to secure healthy heirs, such as King Tutankhamun, most likely participated in incestuous activity, which ultimately contributed to the downfall of many dynasties. In the case of the Hawaiian royal family, they too practiced the marriage of close family members. It was their belief in a divine right or blessing that encouraged them to produce offspring together, often with disastrous results. Ruling over a compliant society, albeit rather stratified, the high chief of the Hawaiian Islands naturally represented the highest-ranking individual of social status. Tribal structure among the Hawaiian Islands was largely influenced by familial status, with position in the social hierarchy of day-to-day life determined by the inheritance of ancestral chiefdoms and titles. By holding the status of high chief, the patriarch or matriarch of the Hawaiian royal family was unmatched in status, with the closest competition in social ranking coming from his or her own siblings. Stemming from this situation, intermarriages between high chiefs and their siblings were seen as a traditional way of securing a royal bloodline, as it removed the possibility of competition from any ambiguous low-ranking suitors. Tribal elders and even subordinate chiefs would often encourage the consummation of such a marriage, as it was believed that the mana transferred to a child in these circumstances would surpass that of their parents, promising a bright leader for the future. Biology unfortunately caught up to the royal family, for after generations of such practices, some children were born with disorders such as epilepsy, hair lips, and schizophrenia. The Hawaiian royal family bloodline eventually became so corrupted by years of inbreeding that towards the end of the 19th century, when the monarchy there was overthrown, its genetic pool was on the verge of total collapse, with rulers struggling to produce healthy heirs. In Europe, another famous example of this practice was the House of Habsburg. This noble family was of Germanic extraction and controlled various regions of Europe from around the 13th century onwards. As devout Christians, the Habsburgs steered away from marrying direct relatives in order to secure their bloodline. Instead, marriage arrangements between more distant relatives, such as cousins from different branches of the family, was the favorite practice. However, by the time they had inherited the Spanish throne in 1516, the family members were already beginning to suffer from noticeable genetic deformities and health deficiencies. One distinct deformity that became particularly common among them was to become known as the Habsburg jaw. This condition was where the lower jaw was significantly larger and much more pronounced than the upper jaw, causing a protruding effect on the lower half of the face. This resulted in a grotesque appearance that affected the ability of those with the deformity to talk and eat properly. The first Spanish Habsburg ruler was Charles I, who was so badly affected by the deformity that his subjects were horrified when they first saw their new ruler. Over the next 2 centuries, the Habsburgs continued the practice of marrying relatives, fearful that if they were to marry outside their family circle, the Spanish crown might eventually pass to another noble household, thus diminishing the family's empire. This prolonged interbreeding resulted in even more problems, however, with a considerable number of Habsburg heirs failing to survive past birth. Shockingly, of those that did survive, only around 50% lived beyond the age of 10. The Habsburg jaw became more and more common among family members as the generations continued, appearing much more pronounced and even causing more serious health concerns. When King Philip IV of Spain married his own niece in 1661, they had together a very sickly son with a very bad case of Habsburg jaw, along with a hideously enlarged tongue. So badly affected was the child that he could barely speak and was unable to eat properly. At the mere age of 3, the boy inherited the throne and became Charles II of Spain. Throughout his life, he endured bouts of various ailments and illnesses, many of which researchers believe were most likely linked to his genetic deficiencies. The king's ill health ultimately earned him the nickname the Bewitched, a title only solidified by the deformity of his face, which grew ever noticeable the older he became. The French ambassador would later mention in a private letter how frightening and ugly the new king's appearance was. Despite 2 marriages, Charles was unable to produce an heir to the throne, likely as a result of his genetic imbalance. When the king eventually succumbed to illness in 1700, this consequently led to the end of the Habsburg royal line that had ruled Spain for nearly 200 years. This in turn triggered the outbreak of the Spanish War of Succession, a conflict that would wreak havoc among European powers and their colonies for over a decade.